Hey everyone, welcome back to all my listeners. I hope you're all having a great day so far. I know I am. And if it's your first time finding me, thanks so much and welcome. Can you believe a new month starts today? How on earth can we be halfway through 2022 already? So I hope you all enjoyed some quiet time, some time to regroup, some time to re-energize this past long weekend, while of course giving all of our gratitude to our fallen heroes. So anyway, welcome you guys. Welcome to my 5th episode of season 6. Today is Wednesday, June 1st, 2022. My name is Sonal Patel, and this is the Paint the Medical Picture podcast series. All right, you guys, I'm going to be continuing the season off strong. I'm going to be diving into my compliance tip today for the new ICD10 CM codes for screening Pap tests. And I go ahead and roll out that red carpet once again for another new newsworthy guest, Betty Hovey. And I close out today's episode with some inspirational words on vision and leadership from James Allen. If you've checked me out on LinkedIn, you know I'm all about compliance and protecting our physicians and valued healthcare professionals when it comes to the business of medicine. I hope this week with me brings you enough to take back to your organizations, to want to dive in deeper, to use my tips and best practices to ensure success. I hope this podcast will help you boost the quality of documentation capture and improve coding accuracy as you help all your providers paint the medical picture. If you like what you're hearing, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss another episode. Please write in a review and kindly drop me a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to my podcast. I'd really love your support. And as always, a friendly disclaimer. Remember, I'm bringing you the news, current healthcare industry news, my compliance tips, and my recommendations based on my over 10 years of experience in front office, back end, coding, and billing for multi-specialty physicians, in compliance, and in auditing for both E&M and surgical operative reports. These are my opinions alone and are not to be construed as legal advice. So let's get into a very special newsworthy that features my guest today, Betty Hovey. I'm so excited for today's session with you, Betty. Can't believe that you're here. So happy to see you.
Thanks, Sonal. Same here. I've been looking forward to doing this since you clicked in with me on LinkedIn. So I'm happy to be here.
So thrilled. All right. Why don't I introduce you to my audience? Okay.
Thank you.
Now, Betty has spent over 30 years in the healthcare field, working with small and large facilities alike. During her career, she has written articles and co-authored manuals and books on coding and billing, as well as she's held numerous coding classes, seminars, webinars, and she's even spoken at conferences across the country on various coding and billing subjects. She's also assisted in opening clinics and building new facilities. Currently, she serves as a senior healthcare consultant and owner of Compliant Healthcare Solutions, a healthcare consulting company. Compliant Healthcare Solutions offers on-site and remote education on multiple specialties, provides auditing services, physician education, and 2021 E&M training for physicians and other providers by specialty. They also speak at national conferences on coding, billing, and healthcare issues. Now, in her career milestones, she's also worked for the AAPC as the director of ICD10 education and training. She's co-authored manuals and presentations. She's held training sessions and gave presentations nationwide on ICD10-CM and ICD10-PCS. She's served as a member of the National Advisory Board for AAPC from the years 2004 through 2007, and she was an officer on the board from 2005 through 2007. Now, Betty currently sits as a council member on the AHIMA, National Council for Excellence in Education, as a board member on Quality MD, and as a board member for the editorial board for BC Advantage. Oh my goodness, Betty, what an incredible, incredible bio. I am thrilled to have you on my podcast. So welcome. Welcome today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sonal. I'm, as I said before, I'm really, really happy to be here. I love talking about coding, documentation, compliance, all of that good stuff.
I love it. I love it that we met up face to face for the first time a few months ago at the NAMUS conference in December in Florida. So when I found you, right, it was tremendous, because you're absolutely right. We are very similar in this little niche in healthcare that is coding, billing, and compliance. So I was thrilled to have found you, right? So, from this bio that I just disclosed to my audience, you have years in this space of healthcare. In the industry, it's huge. What a tremendous feat. So kudos to you. Kudos to you. And I think it's clear that your passion is totally running deep for your proactive side of compliance, right? You want to help providers on the front end, as do I. We both just identify that it's easier to help providers on the front end do things correctly the first time, rather than climbing uphill, right? It's a battle to then try and correct things later, as we can talk about on this podcast. Yeah, exactly. So, you know what? I really wanted to bring you on as a guest today because you put up a post on LinkedIn, like you hinted at earlier. You put up this post on LinkedIn that I was simply captivated by, on injections. And I really want you to dig into this latest OIG fraud case. Your post was kind of hinting at the fact that these types of injections are incorrectly billed. And I want you to really put a spotlight on what your thoughts are, why you think things are being billed that way, and what type of products are these injections that sort of flagged the OIG to step in on a case like this.
Great, happy to. But first, I wanted to say I was listening to your May 25th podcast before I came on today, and heard you're closing in on your 100th podcast. So I wanted to say congrats on that. That's exciting.
Thank you so much.
And also, I want to let you know that you were the first person that I have met in person when we were at NAMUS that had actually, seen one of my LinkedIn broadcasts. It was very exciting for me. I was like, oh, somebody knew me.
Yes, they are fabulous. Yes.
So it's great to meet other people, and there's so many of us growing now. I mean, when I first started decades ago, there were kind of certain pockets of us, but people still didn't understand and fully get everything we did. And things were still kind of growing. And so now to see all, people like yourself and Terry Fletcher and Christine Hall and, so many of us that are out there putting all this stuff out is just so great to see, and so exciting to see how the field and the profession is growing. So that's really good. I'm really happy to see stuff like that. So now on to that post. What I do is I take a look at the Department of Justice and the OIG websites, and I kind of look for recent fraud convictions and settlements, and I post them on LinkedIn because I think it's important for the healthcare field to understand what's going on, and for people to see, like, these are the things that, if something like that is going on, you better make sure that you're taking steps to not do it, or because some of it is usually with these things, though, it's like blatant fraud. And in this case, it kind of tipped onto that. And with the explanation here of going through the case, it's very evident that this is not an abuse issue of, oh, well, I didn't know, and I didn't know the rules, or I didn't know what I was doing. This was kind of like, in your face fraud. And I don't use the F word lightly,
Right.
So that's
Exactly.
one that we don't like to throw around because it carries very serious implications with it. So the one that you mentioned from the injections, it was about a physician, Dr. Roger Wang, who was in California. And since this is a settlement and not a conviction, I need to state that there's been no determination of liability here. So allegedly, the physician was billing Medicare for non-FDA approved drugs that are viscosupplements, which are used for treatment of osteoarthritis pain, like Synvisc or Orthovisc. But the ones that he was using were drugs that were not FDA approved in the United States and were actually packaged and labeled for use in foreign countries.
Wow.
So Medicare doesn't approve that, obviously, because it's non-FDA approved. So they wouldn't pay for the injections themselves, the procedure of injecting, nor would they pay for the cost of the drugs. So allegedly, he was buying these drugs at much lower cost, but billing Medicare as if they were the Synvisc, Orthovisc, Synvisc One, those more expensive medications. And then on top of it, billing for the injections. So neither one of those should have been paid by Medicare. And the U.S. attorneys alleged that he did this thousands of times. So again, it's not a one kind of oops, and somebody said, here, try this, and I didn't realize. I mean, thousands of times. And he ended up settling for over $1 million to settle the case.
What an unbelievable case, right? Those details are mind-blowing. So thousands of injections from this particular doctor in California, these injections that are of a product of an injectable that are not FDA approved, but he went around billing for it. How could you bill it another way, right? Perhaps an unlisted code he could have chosen. No, he chose to use those J codes for Synvisc and Orthovisc, as well as the administration codes, right? All of that is big money. Yep. Big money again. So those are 2 codes per injection, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Thousands of times, as you disclosed, and $1 million in payment he allegedly has settled for. So yeah, that's really, really insightful information. I know I have seen in the work that I've done, I also, in the work that I do, I can't disclose anything in particular, so I can speak in vague generalities. But yes, I've seen these types of injections for osteoarthritis, either to the knee in the terms of Euflexa is a product, or other types of hyaluronic acid types of injections. The trigger point injections as well. There was a big case of Serapin, which actually is also not FDA approved, and lots of providers across the country were trying to use that code as well to get things paid, and then eventually those types of cases also have to settle once Medicare found out, once CMS, once the OIG gets involved, right? And as you said, these are all, in the beginning, these are all alleged things, right? So that's how we have to speak very carefully. So I appreciate that you also do that as well, because I also like to highlight these types of cases once a month at the end of the month on my OIG fraud alert. And I just like to round up a few of the really good ones that I can then send to my providers as they apply to them, right? And these types of injection cases do apply to so many of our provider types, because we want to make sure, of course, that they're not billing for these types of non-FDA products, because they are considered experimental and investigational to a Medicare payer and a Medicaid and a TRICARE, right? So all of our government payers, don't want these types of non-FDA drugs to be used and then paid for. And then you also have to be mindful for our commercial payers too, because so many of them also have payment policies, reimbursement policies, clinical medical policies that address these types of issues that should be looked at the practice level, from your coding team, from your billing team, whoever's in charge, so we get the education done right on the front end again. So our practices aren't paying back or having recoupments and overpayments in 5 to 6 to 7 years time. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's another good point. This is just from the DOJ, so it's just the Medicare part of what's happened to this physician. By no means do I think everybody's done with this physician. Next, I'm sure Blue Cross and Aetna,
secondaries.
I'm sure.
Yes.
And just the commercial patients that he had,
For
I'm sure
sure.
they're all sending records requests and, wanting to look at things. Whatever he made off of doing this is not, he's going to pay back that and then some, probably, because of the fines and those kinds of things and the damages and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm sure that there's more to come for him, but the stuff that I pull up is the stuff from the Department of Justice and the OIG and things like that. So yeah.
Absolutely, right. And these are all valid tools for our providers to use. These are publicly accessible. You can all take a look at the DOJ website, the OIG website, and find this information. And then, of course, there's also professionals like myself and Betty who disclose these things as often as we can on LinkedIn, on our podcasts, on our LinkedIn live sessions, right? We talk about it because we want to help as best as we possibly can to our providers and the medical community to try and do things correctly. Because there are lots of those injectate products that are marketed for other types of countries, right? And that's why the cost of those types of products are much less. Because we don't actually know what's in those injectates, right? There's no clinical trials, there's no efficacy standards that are being tested, there's nothing happening. And so we want patients to be safe, right? We are ourselves patients, so we have to take that into consideration as well.
Definitely.
So yeah, I love it. I love your insights on this incredible hot topic that I had to focus on and bring you on for this podcast. So thank you. Awesome. All right. So why don't we move on to my next question? Now, I want to hear about your experience in your past work for your clients. Again, we speak in generalities here. In terms of your documentation that you've seen in the past, and even that behind the scenes stuff at the practices that you helped to build up, right? Have you ever seen things that don't support regulations in the US, right? And if so, if you ever encountered those types of questionable practices and questionable means, what did you do in those types of instances?
Of course, over the span of my career, I've seen quite a few interesting things when I have been on site, both when I was an employee and when I've had my company coming in as a consultant. I've had practices that have thrown away documentation requests from payors because they were just requests. They didn't think that it was important that maybe they'd go away, take back requests from payors. I've seen physicians and coders that didn't get proper training, putting modifier 59 on everything because that just bypassed that. Well, if you put a 59 on it, it'll get paid, and so you see that. billing an E&M with modifier 25 every time they do a minor procedure, because, they heard that they could and that was okay. And, so it just kind of gets done and slapped on their clone notes, bad templates, bad documentation, it really, you name it. And I probably worked with it. But most of the time, they've truly been cases of not knowing, not knowing what the rules were, or that they were given bad advice from prior employees or other practices, things like that. Not these blatant type of fraudulent activities that, I post about. So what I did and what I do in these cases is document, and I tell everyone I talk to, that's the most important thing: document. Right. Document my findings, submit it to the right people in the organization with a plan of how to correct the actions, and then follow up with them, because it really doesn't help anybody, especially the physicians and the providers, just to say you're doing it wrong, and then not giving them insight on how to correct the behavior. Same as I've been to some practices where they've had just really bad ARs, accounts receivable, and they say their billing department and their auditing department, they're just like underwater because there's so many corrections they're having to do all the time. And when I go in and I assess things and find that, they're correct, I'll make statements of, well, and how did the physicians and other providers take it when you educated them, when you talked to them? Well, we just fix it. Well, okay, so you don't tell them they're doing it incorrectly, and you just keep fixing it on the back end, so they never see they're doing it incorrectly. How do you expect the behavior to change?
Right.
You can't expect them to change if you don't tell them that there's an issue. So, most of the physicians and other providers, I love working with them. That's been my focus for my 30 plus years. I do some facility work, but I really have my heart in with the docs and with the other providers. Most of the time when I work with them, they tell me they just want to take care of their patients. That's all they want to do. Some of this other stuff is just, they don't understand it. They don't want to understand it. They just want to treat their patients. The business of healthcare is just wearing some of them out, that business side of it. Most of the practices, again, that I work with, and that now that I can choose to work with, are ones that don't want more than they deserve. They certainly don't want less than they deserve. They just want to be paid properly for the work they're performing, which is understandable. Everybody does, so I work hard to show them what they need to do to be in compliance with the coding and documentation guidelines, so that they can keep what they get paid. Because, the thing is, it's not about getting paid, because you can get paid for anything. If you submit a claim form and there's an ICD-10 and a CPT that meet medical necessity, you're going to get paid for it. It's about keeping the money you get paid. When a practice tells me, because I hear a lot, well, the insurance paid for it. We got paid for it if we do it that way. It must be right. A good response to have back is, well, then if a payer denies one of your claims, obviously it must be wrong then. So nice. You can't have it both ways.
That's right.
It's not about getting paid. It's about having proper documentation and following the coding and payor guidelines, so that you keep what you got paid. And that comes down to education. And that's why education is, and always will be big with me, and something that, I always impress upon every client I go into. It's not just do the audit and tell me if it's okay. It's about, these are the issues that we have. This is how we go about fixing them. And most of those fixes are educational in nature.
Oh my goodness. Absolutely, Betty. That's really, really insightful. And I couldn't agree with you more. It's absolutely true. it's great that they're getting paid, right? But when we go in, I agree with you. When we go in and do internal audits, that's wonderful that the reimbursement is coming in. But when we're looking at the documentation side by side against those CMS 1500 claim forms, we will identify a few deficiencies, a few dings here or there. That stays between us. That stays between ourselves, the auditor, and our provider, right? So it's an educational, mutually beneficial thing that we're providing, right? So we can tell them that you could tweak that documentation, or you could, eliminate that modifier on the claim. It's unnecessary, right? You don't need a radiology X-ray with an E&M and a modifier 25. It's unnecessary. There's no edit that hits that. You don't need it. There's no CCI. So there's many, many things that are advantageous when we go in, because it stays between us and the practice to help, elevate their documentation and their coding and then their billing, right? So it's more than just giving them an A+, good job, you got paid this month, right? It goes a lot deeper than that.
And it's funny that you say tweak, because I use that all the time, because, I'm telling them it's not, you don't have to massively change everything you're doing. A lot of times it's tweaks. It's just little fixes. And also you made me think of the issue that a lot of times too, and I'm sure you find this, is when I do an audit, sometimes, yes, I find some under documentation. I don't call it overcoding, because usually it's under documenting. They're doing that service. They're not documenting it correctly. But the other thing is, I find a lot of times stuff that they didn't report that they could have, that they can get reimbursed for. So you find a lot of those things too. And it's like, a lot of times the work that I do pays for itself in those types of things. Because I'm like, look at all these things that you could have been reporting and that you're missing. So it goes both ways. You get a lot of positives too when you do these.
Well said. Yeah, I call those missed opportunities. Absolutely. When we go in and audit, we also find many missed opportunities. If you're just an office-based, just doing your E&Ms constantly, versus all of those additional prolonged types of services that you could be adding. There's so many other things to take into consideration, right? And then even with our surgeons, right? There's many things that they're not capturing because they're simply coding from the operative header instead of reading the entire op report to see what else can be captured on those claim forms. Anyway, but bravo. Yes, we do much more than just the ding, right? We also give a lot of gold stars that could be done, those missed opportunities. So well said. Love it. Love it. All right. Why don't we move on? Because I know you and I could keep talking here for forever regarding how to make things better, right? And less egregious for our providers, right? Let's not forget, we started our entire conversation with that fraud case and those injections. So, but why don't you tell my audience, some of your best practice recommendations for, staying under the radar and out of the OIG fraud spotlight, right? What are some of your best tips and recommendations?
I think, the first biggest thing is we've just been kind of alluding to is check your stuff. Do it before somebody else does, and that's going to be a payor. So you're not going to like that when somebody else does it, so perform those internal audits. And it doesn't have to be, massive, big things that are all coordinated all the time. If you have internal staff that has the knowledge to do these things, you can be spot checking different things at different times by what the CBRs, those comparative billing reports, have come out, by what the OIG work plan has, by, so you can do little ones here and there. It doesn't have to be these big, massive, all-consuming things all the time, but you need to be checking your stuff. If you don't have the bandwidth in the practice to do it, hire someone outside to do it. I can't tell how many times that practices have told me that they had no idea there was an issue, and it ends up being an issue that has been there for years, or they call me because they're getting take back requests and, they're like, no clue. And you look at this stuff and it's been going on because they never checked it, so make sure you're doing those checks. And a lot of times from things that you find and the things that you help them with, again, that pays for what's going on, so, and they really don't have to be these huge things. So make sure you're checking it, and then act on the audits. So having audit results and ignoring them is like having a compliance plan that's sitting on a shelf getting cobwebs on it, right?
Lots of dust. Yes, exactly.
Buddy, an audit report should come with findings and recommendations, and that's whether you get it externally from an outside consulting agency or if your internal staff is doing it. Once again, they should make sure that they're following up with those recommendations on how to fix these things. And you need to pay attention to what those are and then act on those. Make sure that your coding staff is up to date on coding and billing guidelines, because coding professionals need to attend webinars and classes and conferences to keep their skills up, just as physicians and other providers need to get their CME credits. There's a reason why these things are required, because the stuff we do is always changing. And so you need to stay up to date. You don't just get certified and then never have to do anything again. Right. Not if you want to continue to work in the profession. So there are a lot of great educational opportunities now too, as far as the staff goes, because one thing that the pandemic did do was push a lot of the virtual stuff out that's now available, and that's really great. It used to be you had to go attend something, right. But that's not the case anymore. In person, you can see these things live, they stream them, they do the recorded ones now, you have all the virtual education. I mean, you name it, we've got all of this stuff available. And then if you find that there is a problem, do what you need to do to correct it, take action on it, because if you get let's say the OIG, God forbid, comes into your practice and is looking at stuff, and they discover that there were these audits that were being done, and you see that there's finding after finding, audit after audit that says this is an issue, and you never did anything about it. Now you're moving into, well, that's no longer abuse. You repeatedly saw that this was an issue and you ignored it. So check it, act on it, get it fixed.
Beautiful, beautiful tips. Yeah.
Oh, and I wanted to add in there too, I loved this morning, I did see your LinkedIn post before we got on that gave your tips. Yes. And I thought those were all great too. Utilizing the E&M score sheets and doing things by service type, hone in and look for where your problems are. Those are all great tips too.
Exactly. Oh my goodness, Betty, just incredible insights on how to get things done on the front end. It's so true. And we really need to, there are so many voices in this space now, thankfully, like you addressed earlier, because this was all kind of hush hush a few years ago, right? Not many of our providers understood the significance and importance of compliance, right? But now, with so many of us talking about this, and getting the message out, we still really need our small practices to really put their pennies towards a budget for compliance, right? Because as you said, just like they have to go to conferences and get those CMEs for themselves, whoever they retain on their staff, right? Those professionals who code and bill also, like you said, have to maintain their continuing education credits as well, right? Year after year for their organization bodies of the AAPC or AHIMA. So that's really important because as the pandemic has shown the nation and the world, everything changes so quickly, and the amount of information we had to understand and digest within these 2 years were rapid fire, the amount of change that happened due to telehealth and telemedicine, right? Those things changed rapidly early in 2020. And we were going around in circles, talking to each other, trying to understand the final rules and CMS's FAQs that came out like every third day. And they changed their mind every third day. And then we had to go back and tell our providers, oops, they changed their mind. This is now the guidance, right? So, you know, a budget towards compliance is key. It really can be affordable, like you said, when you do small bite-sized amounts internally as often as possible, right? You don't have to put in the big bucks for a once a year thing, because then that's a lot to undertake, right? For the consulting company, for your internal staff, that's a lot to put on them if it's for an entire, you know, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and fourth quarter all at one time. So if we try and advise them to do things a little more piecemeal, it's going to go a long way. So
definitely.
Yeah. Really insightful points, Betty. Love it. Love it all. Amazing, amazing from you. And like I said, I agree with everything that you said. Now, you know, on to my last question here, you know, as hopefully my audience can tell hearing our conversation today, you know your stuff. You know your stuff. You've been in this industry for decades, right? So, you know, I still think you have lots more to do and give back. I'm pretty sure that's what you're doing with these LinkedIn Live broadcasts, which I adore. I want to know, in my last question to you, and this is kind of a deep one, it's kind of off topic, you can talk about whatever you want, but I would like to know, what do you see on the horizon for yourself in the next 5 years?
Boy, first, thank you for saying that about the LinkedIn Live broadcasts. They are really fun to do. I love doing them. I like talking about different topics in healthcare and interacting with the attendees, as you know, we were talking about prior to. I get to do favorite topics of mine, dermatology and E&M and auditing and all that kind of stuff, whatever hits me, you know, for the week. But to your question, that's a really good question. I'm looking forward to the E&M changes for 2023. That's going to be a big, you know, thing coming up. And I think after the 2021, you know, people are going to be trying to get on it a little bit faster, maybe. And I know we had the whole pandemic thing that put a real hold on trying to get education for that. So hopefully it'll be a little bit smoother with this stuff coming up. And ICD-11, you know, it's coming. It's always in the back of my mind. But that they say, you know, in putting together the ICD-10 stuff, when I worked at AAPC and we built the manuals and the materials to go and do the training nationwide for that, that was, you know, like a huge endeavor. And it was very rewarding. I don't think ICD-11 is going to be as big, of course, as a change, because now we're kind of used to that code set idea. But the fact that ICD-11 is all electronic based, I think is going to be an issue here in the States. So I think there's going to be some issues with that, because there's still a lot of offices and practices that are on paper charts and, you know, other things. So it's going to be a little difficult to go. I think a little more difficult than what some people are thinking. So I'm excited to get involved in that kind of stuff. And I hope to grow my network, keep on educating and collaborating like you and I are doing now, and having the guests on my broadcasts and stuff. it just, I'm jazzed about being able to speak in person again.
Seriously.
So exciting.
It's been a long time.
It has. It was a struggle for me not to be speaking in person, because I feed off of, that interaction with attendees. You can see there was nothing worse for me the first time I had to do. I was doing an educational service for these physicians, going through with like their audit things and educating them and stuff like that. And they were in another state, and we had to be doing it, virtually. And they had an issue with their comm thing. So I had to do the whole thing for 3 hours on mute.
Oh my
goodness.
You couldn't hear
anything that they said.
No feedback.
So I was speaking to dead air, and I try to make little jokes every now and then as I'm speaking, and so I would make one, and then, I nothing,
nothing
so
back.
I don't know.
Right.
Do they think I'm funny? Are they bored to death? Are they even paying attention? Oh, it's awful. 3 hours. It was awful. It was hard. It was so hard.
That's difficult.
So I'm really happy about being able to do that and see. I like, seeing the light bulb go off, when I'm talking to people and my attendees, when I'm doing things. It's like, so it just really fuels you to express better and to kind of go that extra mile. So I'm really looking forward to doing that kind of stuff again.
I love it. Well, I know you're going to be incredible. All of these things I can see you doing, and doing swimmingly, right? Because all of this education, and the last thing you said about the light bulb turning on, that's exactly it, right? If we can do that, if we can give that back to make it simpler, easier, more palatable, that's ideal. So I know you can do all of those things. So exciting, Betty. Amazing. Now, you know what? I know it's time for us to go, but I know a lot of my listeners might not necessarily know you until today. So would it be okay if I post in my show notes your LinkedIn profile? How else can they get in touch with you, and maybe your services?
Oh, yes, of course.
Like that. Yeah, great.
Yeah. So other ways to get a hold of me would be through my website, which is chcs.consulting. We have on there a list of all of our services and different ways to contact us. We have our e-learning portal on there, because we've started doing our live webinars and webinar recordings on there for people. So all of those kind of things are listed on our website.
Wonderful. Great. Well, I'll make sure that I include those details on my show notes. Amazing, Betty. Amazing. Now, in our incredible conversation today, did we miss anything? Would you like to leave my audience with any of your final thoughts?
Well, I just wanted to let everybody know we've been kind of talking about the broadcasts, and our next one, my next LinkedIn Live broadcast, I call it Healthcare Happenings. So my next one is June 10th, and that you are going to be one of my guests, and we're going to talk about networking. So I'm going to have Brian Quee, who is the medical coding geek, and he has his NEC podcast. Vanessa Moldovan, who does the For the Love of Revenue podcast. Christine Hall, who does the Coding with Christine podcast. And then last but not least, you, my friend. So we're going to have a nice big discussion on networking, because it's critical for people in our industry if you're looking to expand and to grow and just to find different opportunities. It's all in these connections that people are making, like you and I, from doing the broadcast and then being at NAMUS, and then us starting discussions. So that's one of the things that I'm trying to do with these broadcasts too, is because you get the same kind of, you get a base that starts to attend. And so they sing hi to each other in the
Mhm.
comments, and, they get together. And so I think that's wonderful. So anybody that wants an invitation, if they want to get on to where they get invites to all my healthcare happenings broadcasts, they just need to follow me on LinkedIn. And then when we have one coming up, I try to do them every other week. I might be moving them to every week because I'm getting more to say, I guess.
Awesome.
So that's something that if they follow me, they'll always get the invitations for it.
Perfect, Betty. Well, I'm so excited for my guest opportunity on your show. So I can't wait. I can't wait. I'm so excited to be a part of the panel. So it's perfect.
Thank you.
So
It should be fun.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so looking forward to it. June 10th, everybody. So tune in. It's going to be amazing networking. We all have to get out there and do it again, right? Network,
Yes.
network. So I'll see you soon, Betty. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And now it's time for my best practice tips in Trusty Tip. So in today's new compliance tip, I wanted to focus on new diagnosis coding that's been included for screening PAP and pelvic exams. These new codes were effective on October 1st. Now, these three new ICD-10 CM codes are Z92.850 for personal history of chimeric antigen receptor T cell therapy. The second new ICD-10 CM code is Z92.858 for personal history of other cellular therapy. And finally, the third new ICD-10 CM code that's been included for screening PAP and pelvic exams is Z92.86 for personal history of gene therapy. Now, these three codes are all indicators of the patient's risk level. The risk level for patients contracting cervical cancer are high. All three place the patient at high risk status. So it's crucial to also know then some claim denial reasons that CMS may be denying screening pap tests, pelvic exams, and HPV screenings in a couple of these types of scenes. Like, number one, if the patient who is not at high risk got a covered screening within the past 2 years. Or number two, if the patient who is at high risk got a covered screening within the past year. And finally, third, if there's that patient who happens to be at high risk, got a covered HPV screening within the past 5 years, or at least 4 years and 11 months, or 59 months total after the most recent HPV screening. Now, the devil here is in the fine print with CMS policies, isn't it? So what they mean here is that coverage frequency dictates here for screening PAPs. So I always recommend that you should be creating and keeping a tool handy to help remind you of how often you can be billing for these types of services. So remember that it's every 24 months, which means at least 23 months after the most recent screening pap test or pelvic exam. That can be covered then if it's every 24 months. And then if it's annually, which means at least 11 months after the most recent screening pap test or pelvic exam. And then finally, for that HPV screening, that can only be once every 5 years, or more specifically, at least 4 years and 11 months, or 59 months in total after the most recent HPV screening. And please remember to document all coverage indications to support billing and to support reimbursement. Like when a female patient who meets one of these criteria that I'm going to talk about now. The first is evidence, which is evidence based on her medical history or other findings that she is at high risk for developing cervical or vaginal cancer, and her physician or her authorized practitioner recommends that she has the test more frequently than every 2 years. And then if the woman is of childbearing age who's had a screening pelvic exam or pap test during any of the previous 3 years, indicating the presence of cervical or vaginal cancer or other abnormality. Now, let's go back and talk about those other applicable ICD-10 CM diagnosis codes that have stayed the same for screening PAPs, right? These are categorized, again, by low and high risk levels for the patient contracting cervical cancer or vaginal cancer. So there are 7 low risk level codes, as well as the original 7 high risk level codes. So let's start with the first 7 low level risk codes. Now, the first one is Z01.411 for encounter for gynecological examination, general, routine with abnormal findings. And then there's an additional instruction note that says to use additional codes to identify those abnormal findings. Now, the second low-level risk code is Z01.419 for encounter for gynecological examination, general, routine, without abnormal findings. The third code is Z11.51 for encounter for screening for HPV primary. The fourth low-level risk code is Z12.4 for encounter for screening for malignant neoplasm of cervix. The fifth code is Z12.72 for encounter for screening for malignant neoplasm of vagina. The sixth ICD-10 CM code is Z12.79 for encounter for screening for malignant neoplasm of other genitourinary organs. And finally, that seventh low-level risk code is Z12.89 for encounter for screening for malignant neoplasm of other sites. Then let's move on to the original 7 high-risk level codes. Those are Z72.51 for high-risk heterosexual behavior. The second high-risk level code is Z72.52 for high-risk homosexual behavior. The third is Z72.53 for high-risk bisexual behavior. The fourth is for Z77.29, contact with and suspected exposure to other hazardous substances. The next code is for Z77.9 for other contact with and suspected exposures hazardous to health. And the sixth high-level code is for Z91.89 for other specified personal risk factors not elsewhere classified. And finally, the seventh high-risk level code is for Z92.89 for personal history of other medical treatment. So I think it's very important to remember to capture all relevant diagnosis coding on claims from the clinical documentation. It's also crucial to stay current on all new ICD-10 CM codes as they're released on October 1st and even when they're off cycle, right? I think it's this COVID-19 pandemic that has demonstrated to all of us just how far we've all come in this space of healthcare. It's so important for our providers to stay involved in their coding and their billing practices. It's fundamental if you have Medicare as a payer to keep your eye on correct and compliant coding and billing practices and to make sure you are adhering to all of them to ensure you are meeting the medical necessity from the very start. Because when the documentation paints the medical picture with clarity and vibrancy from the onset of care, a certified medical coder can then abstract codes with accuracy. And finally, I focus Season 6's Spark on vision and leadership. I want this 6th season Spark to be filled with the world's thought leaders, writers, artists, philosophers, everyone who inspires the need for vision and leadership in all that we strive to do. So, in this week's inspiring quote in Spark is from the British philosopher James Allen. Dream lofty dreams, and as you dream, so shall you become. Your vision is the promise of what you shall one day be. Your ideal is the prophecy of what you shall at last unveil. Absolutely true, right? I think this quote inspires us. It reminds us that only with our dreams can our visions come to life. Can those visions be actualized, be fully realized? I am happy James Allen's spark still burns brightly in all of us today. So that wraps up today's episode. And as always, I appreciate you all diving into today with me. If you want more information from me, please go ahead and follow me on LinkedIn. I'll leave links to everything in the show notes below. Please have an amazing week ahead, and please continue staying safe and healthy. Start enjoying summer, you guys. Start enjoying summer. Thank you so much for listening in on today's very special episode, and I hope every week with me brings you closer to helping your providers paint a masterpiece. See you next Wednesday.